It's Talisman Adventures TTRPG. We're looking at the support you get as a GM, and if you think you get a lot, you're wrong. You get so much more, it's insane. Well, let's have a look. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Talisman Adventures TTRPG review series. Now, my name is Guy, and to be clear, Pegasus Spiele, the makers of Talisman Adventures, have commissioned me to do these reviews. Now, it has been an absolute pleasure going through the book for me. I mean, it really has, it's been fantastic. So, what I present to you, it is my honest thoughts. Now, for people who like rules light rather than rules heavy, and rules that support the story rather than the numbers, then this is the TTRPG for you. It really is, and I really, really like that. Now, we're talking though about the GM support that this book provides for us. And the book, and you can get a link down below, it comes in two parts. Now, this actually isn't very clear when you buy the book, so don't panic like me when you're reading the player's book, which is the front part of the book, and it's referencing the GM's book. So when you're reading the player's guide and you go, what, the GM's book? Oh, now I've got to buy another bloody book. No, dumbass. Check the back of the book, because at the back, or not at the back, in the middle of the book is the Game Master's Guide. And so there we go. It's two in one. Now, I really like that, and I hope you can see on screen as well. The two books are color-coded for easy access. Now, the GM section, of course, is blue, and it accounts for about half the book. Yeah, it's about half the book. And yes, so what's in that? Well, it starts off with the basic stuff. There's an introduction to GMing and the notion of not railroading the PCs, a nice little section on that. It's got some good advice, and it might be a little bit brief if you're an experienced GM, but these, if it's a starting out GM, it's perfect. There's some critical rules for PC versus PC combat. Now, combat, if you recall, in Talisman is really just the PC's role, and if they fail, that's when the opponent succeeds. So they needed some dynamics for how PC versus PC combat works, and they've got some pretty cool mechanics in there which make it fairly straightforward and easy to follow along. I never advocate PC versus PC, but it does happen from time to time, and just knowing that there are rules that deal with that, I think it's really useful. The book does say that social skills like intimidation, seduction, those kinds of things should never be used against a fellow PC. I'm not sure I agree with that personally, but that's a whole different video. I mean, that's a whole different debate. We then get a wonderful comprehensive guide to strangers. That's chapter 2. And obviously there's the attitude table, like, dislike, hate, love, etc., etc., etc. And I mean, most TTRPGs have that. What Talisman does, though, is it takes it to the next step. They include a whole section on different NPCs that the PCs might encounter. They have some stats, that's what you expect. But more importantly, they have suggestions and guidelines for what those NPCs might be able to offer the PCs. I think it's a really wonderful idea. So let's say, for example, the PCs walk into town and they bump into an astrologer. And you go to the astrologer section and they offer the astrologer some coin, or they do a favor for the astrologer. What sort of reward would an astrologer give the PCs? Well, in this case, they give the PCs a success on their next guide check because they read the stars and that sort of thing. So, I mean, that's a pretty cool idea, and I do like that. Again, it's encouraging role play. It's encouraging the PCs to actually be nice to NPCs because there is some kind of return for that. It's not required that is the return, it's just suggested. So again, for younger GMs who don't know what astrologers do, it's a nice little handhold. Chapter 3 is all about followers, that wonderful follower system that Talisman Adventures has. A brief recap. Followers are NPCs who follow the PCs around. Instead of having stats, etc., 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 they instead just grant a bonus to the PC, kind of like a magical item, and then they use a loyalty, skill, value point system to see whether they stay with the PCs, whether they leave, and the PCs can influence that and make their followers really love them. And again, it's, hey, here's some role-playing opportunities for you which actually have a mechanical bonus, rather than a lot of other TTRPGs where there is no mechanical bonus. to engaging with your NPCs and that sort of thing. So I do like that. I really, really, really like that. I've also spoken about followers in previous videos, so I'm not going into that too much. Yeah, so we've got followers, we've got strangers. All right, what's next? Well, then we get monsters and wild beasts. Naturally, I mean, we're dealing with all of the NPCs, basically, that you can encounter. They are pretty much what you'd expect. There's no monsters in there you go, wow, these are amazingly unique. It's the stock standard stuff, which, I mean, it's pretty much what you need, though. It's goblins, it's ghouls, it's ghosts, it's dragons, it's wyverns. Nothing wrong with that. The monster stat blocks are simple and clean. Of course, you don't really have a huge amount to do as the GM when a monster is engaging with the players, other than be narrative and describe the battle. Because when the players fail the check, that's when monsters start to do their stuff. And if a player rolls a 1 on that Kismet dice, that's when the powers, the triggers of the monsters then happen. Chapter 5 talks about the travel mechanic. Now, you remember that astrologer that gave our PCs an auto success on their next guide check? Well, this is where it would be used. So this is the deal. Every time players or PCs move from location A to location B, and it's going to take longer than, say, a day, the travel mechanic then is supposed to pop in. You need to have a guide, a watcher, and a hunter. Only the guide is critical. The others are there basically for flavor. Now, the guide at the beginning of each day makes a survival or lore check. Nothing new. Then, based on their success or lack thereof, there are consequences. Their journey could take an extra day because the guide made a poor decision, or it could take half a day, being cut in half because the guide made a really good roll, or they had an astrologer friend who allowed them to auto-succeed. That was pretty cool, and I like the way that it allows you to keep track of how many days have passed. But then you start to add in the Watcher, and suddenly their check is all about determining random monster encounters for the PCs to then have to engage in. And I don't like that. It's like, if I'm going to trigger something, I'm going to trigger it myself. I don't want the dice to trigger it. And again, depending on how well the Watcher rolls, it could be that they are able to ambush monsters, or if they roll badly, then the monsters can ambush them. I'm wary of game mechanics like this because in 6 days of travel, you have 6 monster encounters because of 6 bad rolls. Although combat is really fast in this game, it can still sometimes be a slogfest. And if the PCs are heading to a distant tower and they have all of these encounters and they get beaten down and they drink all of their potions and they use all of their magic and they're like, no, we got to go back to town. I want you to get to the tower. I don't want you to have to run back to town. So anyway, it is there, and there it is. TTRPGs have been using random encounter tables for years, so why not turn it into a mechanic here? Absolutely fine. And then the last role is the hunter, and that's basically to provide food for the party as they're moving through territories so that they don't have to worry about food rations. So this role is largely honorific because not a lot of people keep track of iron rations or food rations and that sort of thing. So anyway, there we go. Then there are encounter tables which allow for the party to have random encounters. There are hazards. Now, hazards I do like. Rivers and flood, avalanches, insect swarms. There's some really cool rules on making your own hazards. And yes, sort of really punching up the notion that travel is dangerous and these things can happen. They have some nice rules on traps. Traps are very simple from a mechanical perspective. They're straightforward. They have a threat value to be seen, and then you can try and disable them or not, or trigger them, and then they do damage, and it's straight up. Poisons and venoms, very similar to traps. Again, nice and simple, not overly complex. There's no onset times or this and that. It's just this will happen, and this will happen, and then that happens. There are some poisons in there that will literally just kill the characters. It's like roll, otherwise you take just so much damage. Anyway, it's really, 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 really cool. Okay, experience and gaining experience round out what we expect from a GM sourcebook. There are some nice examples of how to give out experience, how to change level advancement, make it more milestone-y. You are only awarding 1 XP to a player for a normal combat encounter, maybe 3 XP for a really difficult encounter or a social encounter or overcoming a trap or finishing a storyline storyline. So, I mean, that's what they're then going to use to improve themselves. I do like that. Why have 1,000 or 2,000 experience points? Why not just have 5 or 10 or 8? Anyway, so that's cool. Any PC can identify magical items, but in order to do so, they have to try, and they have to be really good at like lore or magic or something like that to be able to actually determine the effect. But the magic items themselves, they usually have a basic effect, and then they usually have an effect that requires a fate point to activate. I really like this integration of saying, well, you're going to get fate points, now you're going to use them to activate your magical items, which are more powerful, but they also have some base values. They're usually just augmenting the character. When it comes to magic items, they have a price, which I really love. I really love that, because then you know what they cost, right? And that's really useful. The book also has a short adventure, quite a fun adventure as well. And they've included all the monsters that you need, so that you don't have to sort of page backwards and forwards. Again, just thinking with their heads, really like that. Then we get to the appendices of the book, which I'm actually pretty damn sure I would have just put them in as a regular chapter into the book, because they're really useful. They're really awesome. Authors, they're really awesome. So, for example, you have aspiration. Aspirations are things that your characters want to do, want to sort of some kind of goal. And when they achieve that goal, then they get fate points. Again, it's just about driving that role-playing experience. So I really, really like that. There are some interesting location random tables, which is really cool. You roll randomly, or you can just choose one, and then the rules are presented for an interesting location. So you come across a sacrificial altar. There's some rules on how to use it and what happens if you do use it. Maybe it's a demon that pops out of the sacrificial altar. Maybe you permanently gain a bonus to your life points. Really, really fun things. I really, really appreciate that when it comes to adding in stuff. And then there's an index that finishes up the book. And it's a fairly good index, although some of the words are not indexed because they're kind of buried under other stuff, and you do need to do a bit of hunting. I think that's probably the weakest thing in this entire thing is that index. But as a go-to for basic points, it does what it does. Overall, the GM support for Talisman Adventures is comprehensive. It's thought out. It's practical. I mean, these are points that really make me excited, right? So next week, I will be doing my campaign plan for the Talisman Adventure series called Nevermore, which I will be running over December and all the way through to February. It's going to be a 12-part game. It should be so much fun, and designing that campaign is going to be interesting because we're going to do it for a little bit higher level. Because we thought, well, why not? Let's start at a slightly higher level and see what the game is like at those higher levels. So watch out for that episode next week. Pegasus Spiele, the makers of Talisman Adventures, were the sponsors of today's show, and I have to say their product, it's a good one. I mean, even if you're a die-hard D&D fan, I'd suggest still checking it out. Why? Well, because there are some cool concepts in the system. If you think combat is a major time sink and super boring in Dungeons & Dragons, it can be, Talisman might give you a solution. If you want your NPCs who follow the PCs around to actually have meaning and value without sort of getting in the way or being a bog down for you, Talisman Adventure might be for you. So aside from the simplicity of the system, I'm really hard pressed to find anything that I don't like about this game. Thank you for watching, and until next time, happy gaming.